What's up, guys? Welcome into the Fireside Bears YouTube channel. Usayd alongside Max Smith here. You can follow us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Fireside Bears. You can follow myself and Max on Twitter at Usayd and at Max Smith ESM. Max, it's crazy because it doesn't seem like it was that long ago that the Rams were in the Super Bowl in 2018, and then everyone was talking about the Bears possibly having a similar path to the Super Bowl. Obviously, this is after going 12-4 in 2018, and then everything kind of went crashing down. And the Rams got back to the Super Bowl 3 to 4 seasons later after making the playoffs and being eliminated a couple times. The Bears, on the other hand, things went crashing down, but then the Cincinnati Bengals also were irrelevant for so long under our guy Andy Dalton, and then became relevant once they drafted Joe Burrow and were in the Super Bowl just 2 years later. But how you doing today, man?
I'm good. I think this game was probably one of the lesser of the Super Bowls over the past couple of years. Obviously, it wasn't the Rams. It was bad as the Rams' last try at the Super Bowl with Jared Goff. There's a lot of controversy around the officiating, but we shouldn't be surprised. The officiating was awful all year. Bears fans should be particularly sensitive to that statement, considering some of the ridiculous calls we've got this year. But at the end of the day, the Los Angeles Rams put together a world championship organization this year, and they did so through the acquisition of all-star talent, right? The Rams went through a different bit of an acquisition period than the Bengals. Obviously, the Bengals loaded up through free agency, primarily on little undervalued, underrated players that had pretty high skill caps, just weren't performing as well as their previous teams thought that they could. They were able to kind of put together this ragtag team of misfit toys that obviously got them all the way to the chip. Whereas the Rams, of course, traded their entire future for retirement home all-stars and are walking away with the Lombardi. So, knock it. But, hey, they put all their chips on the table. They went all in, and they're walking away pretty happy today. I'm not so sure they're going to be happy in the next couple of years, but that's when we get there. There's a lot that we can learn specifically from the Bengals and specifically on how not to build an offensive line. Like I said, I think Ryan Poles is probably one of the smartest general managers right now in the NFL for openly going out and saying nothing but how important a strong offensive line is ever since he walked into Hallis Hall. Because what we just saw on Sunday is exactly what he was talking about, right? You could have the most explosive wide receiver core in the entire NFL. You can have an incredible quarterback. You can have an incredible running back. You can have a serviceable defense. But if your line of attack on the offense doesn't win, you're not going to win, right? So, I mean, hey, you have one of the best defensive lines in the league. You have one of the best defensive linemen of all time. Not shocking that team won the game at the end of the day. But the Rams put up a good fight, and there's a lot we can learn from them.
Okay, so I want to start with, and we'll get to the offensive line in just a moment here, but I think something needs to be said here for the way the Rams and Bengals handled the quarterback position, and then looking at how the Bears handled the quarterback position. Look, the Bears kind of went into, and let's just take a couple steps back here. Jared Goff and Mitch Trubisky were at one point the futures for both teams. And then both these franchises kind of realized these guys are not getting the job done for us, and so we need to upgrade. And so what did the Rams do when it came to upgrading? Well, I understand they gave up 2 first-round picks, but they had the head coach directly involved in the selection of the quarterback because the way that Sean McVay kind of walked into the situation, let's just be honest. I mean, that 2018 Super Bowl run, that was Todd Gurley and Sean McVay leading the charge. It was no means Jared Goff being one of the big reasons that the Rams even got to the Super Bowl. And then you kind of fast forward to a couple of years later, and what happens is Sean McVay realizes if I'm going to win a championship, I need to have my quarterback. I need someone that thrives irrespective of my scheme. And that's why the Rams went out and got Matthew Stafford and traded 2 first-round picks for him. Similarly, when you look at the Bears and Bengals, ultimately what's happened is the Bears are a team that's never really had the head coach have a say in the quarterback process. And I understand people are going to sit here and are going to say, well, you know what? Look, like Matt Nagy was involved in the selection of Justin Fields. But there's something to be said for all that. The fact that Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles are basically being told, you need to make it work with Justin Fields, and that's the end of it. Okay. Zach Taylor, he's someone that I wanted fired basically halfway through the 2021 season when the Bengals weren't really winning. But there's also passive aggressive backhanded comment that needs to be made, that I think it's real amazing what tends to happen when you can get the head coach involved from day one in the selection of a quarterback. The results are going to be vastly different because the Bears have basically butchered this, right? They've gone ahead and basically told Matt Nagy, hey, I understand you weren't in the room for Mitch Trubisky and you weren't with the organization, but you make it work. Now they're telling Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles, yeah, you may not have been in the room for Justin Fields. You were with different organizations, but you better make it work and build a Super Bowl caliber roster. So that right there essentially shows the way that the Rams and Bengals kind of handled the QB position, having the head coaches be directly involved in the selection of that player shows it goes a long way towards building a good, stable Super Bowl winning roster. And you know what? Let's be real. The Bengals are a team that, were you to talk to me at the start of the year and say, the Bengals are going to be in the Super Bowl, I would have looked at you and said, no, you're crazy because they have to get through the Chiefs and the Bills. But ultimately, this is also a league where luck and one or two dominoes falling your way plays a big part. And hey, Joe Burrow may not have an offensive line, and we'll get into that in just a moment here, but Joe Burrow is about as legit as it gets. And I think that because of his rise to stardom and the way that he covered up a lot of the holes for the Bengals in 2021, you're going to see a lot of teams basically have to speed up and higher their expectations for a lot of these quarterbacks moving forward.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of things there that are really important, and I think we should caveat the conversation about coaches choosing their quarterbacks with the specific details between Zach Taylor and Sean McVay, is that both are pretty much offensive minded coaches, right? Like there's no one out there that would disagree with those statements. Both of the guys who wanted to say, these are my quarterbacks, this is who I want leading my offense that I'm going to generate, and this is what we're going to live with, right? So Matt Nagy obviously didn't get the guy that he wanted when he came to Chicago. I guess the flip side is Eberflus, I guess, maybe didn't even really care that much. Like, it's clear that he respects Justin Fields based off of the things that he said and the meetings that they've had, but I don't think it's necessarily as detrimental to your organization to have an defensive-minded head coach or a guy who's really centered on building your defense to inherit a quarterback in his second year in the NFL that many think is prime for an incredible breakout, right? So I think when you're an offensive coach like Matt Nagy, your point is 100% correct. Like, I think that, and I think that's something that people need to talk about really, is these offensive coaches in the league typically do really well with the quarterbacks that they want and not so much with the quarterbacks that they don't want, because they, again, are fitting square pegs into circles, and it just doesn't work. So that's a really good note for people across the league to kind of take a note of is, hey, look, if we're going to bring in an offensive head coach, we should probably consider bringing in a quarterback or trading up to grab a quarterback that this coach wants, right? Because, I mean, it works now. And another standard 100% with Joe Burrow is correct. And this is something that a lot of people are talking about, and it's unfair. There have been a swath of quarterbacks in their second years that have done incredibly well, right? Or even in their first year, right? There's this new wave of young generational talent that we're witnessing in guys like Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, now add Joe Burrow to the list, Patrick Mahomes, and now if Mac Jones breaks out somehow, or if he doesn't have a great year, right, what does that spell for his career? If he comes out and lays an egg next year, what does that spell for the future of Mac Jones? Because people are going to want nothing but the great, like exactly what happened to Joe Burrow. What does that look like for Justin Fields? If Justin Fields comes out and has an okay year, numbers that don't blow people away, does that automatically make him a dud, right? I think Josh Allen, of course, is in that generational talent, but he took a little bit longer to break out. And I think that people need to remind ourselves that just because somebody can catch lightning in a bottle one year doesn't mean they're going to do it multiple times. And Joe Burrow had a fantastic year without any question, right? Comeback player of the year. in my opinion, was like absolutely ridiculous, right? But is that something that can be sustained? And I think that's a question that a lot of people need to ask is the Bengals caught lightning in a bottle this year. They had a lot of things go their way. Were they a good team? Yes. Should they have been in the Super Bowl compared to the Bills or the Chiefs? I mean, hey, they won the games, right? But probably not. If we're looking at it from like an analyst perspective, probably not. Like they're definitely not the better team, but they won. They got to the Super Bowl. But the idea that we have to value quarterbacks off of their second year in the league, and if they don't go to the Super Bowl their second year of the league, or if they don't go deep in the playoffs their second year in the league, we're going to immediately assume that they're busts, is a really dangerous precedent to set. And I'm not trying to like preface that as Justin Fields is going to have a bad second year, so we just have to lie to ourselves about this. Like not at all. It's just that sometimes things move faster for players entering the league, right? And Joe Burrow was obviously league ready. His freshman year, he had a rookie year. He had an incredible season too until he got hurt. Like he was making a lot of people go, wow, this guy may be legit. This might be the first round quarter or first overall quarterback that's legit in a long time. So, yeah, I mean, it's just a dangerous precedent to set across the league. And I don't know if there's anything we can do to stop it. I think it's already internalized at this point, but we can just be those, naysayers in the back saying, give them another year, maybe they'll figure it out. Just stop throwing away your quarterbacks after 2 years if they don't go to the Super Bowl now.
Well, let me add this in too before we move on to the offensive line, because when you look at the last couple of years, you talk about this concept of lightning in a bottle. The NFL is very much a surprise and very much a year to year, week to week league. So, like in 2018, the Bears were the biggest surprise. 2019, it was the 49ers. 2020 was a crazy season because it was the real COVID year. Not to say this past season wasn't COVID year, but 2020 was extreme COVID year at its finest. But 2020, the biggest surprise was the Bucks, just because that's what's going to happen when you go out and get the best quarterback in the world. And then 2021, it was the Bengals that were the biggest surprise. And so we've seen these surprises pop up year to year to year. And what's interesting is that in 2019 and 2020, the 49ers and Bucks went to the Super Bowl, right? In 2018, the vibe around the Bears was that was a legitimate Super Bowl team because they could have won 8 straight. And then in 2017, by the way, the biggest surprise was also the Rams, who had that big turnaround in Sean McVay and went all the way to the wild card game. And 2016 was the Atlanta Falcons. The reason I bring those things up is because when you look at it, the Bengals got hot at the right time. When you look at a lot of the talent on the Bengals roster, guess what? A lot of it is drafted. They've done a phenomenal job over the last couple seasons, and it's outside. This drafted talent. The key thing to note is not just Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. Okay, it's T. Higgins, it's Tyler Boyd, it's Joe Mixon, it is these guys on the defensive side of the ball, such as Jesse Bates. When you look at some of their free agency signings, hey, Trey Hendrickson, best free agent signing, I think, of the 2021 season. You look at a lot of other drafted players, Logan Wilson, Jermaine Pratt, they have guys like Eli Apple, who I understand gets cooked by everybody, but let's be real. I mean, you can talk all the smack you want about Eli Apple, but one thing you can't deny is Eli Apple showed up in that Chiefs game, especially in overtime. All right. Eli Apple right now is one of the reasons that the Bengals were even playing on Sunday in the Super Bowl. So they have some really good, solid talent there. And this is even mentioning guys like DJ Reader, by the way, who I love DJ Reader. Very underrated for what he does not get enough credit around the league. But the point is that the Bengals consistently hit on these draft picks, and they did it at a high level. Now, the offensive line's a completely different story because the O-line for the Bengals, since 2019 when Zach Taylor became head coach, the Bengals have acquired 12 players at that position in terms of draft picks and free agency. Unfortunately, none of those outside of maybe Jonah Williams, who's a first round pick, has really even been a stud. And by the way, the problem with Jonah Williams, and I said this coming out of the 2019 NFL draft because he's an Alabama guy and I have connections at Alabama. I said that Jonah Williams is better suited at a guard. Please, 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 please do not make him a left tackle. But the Bengals obviously don't want to listen. And I don't know why they haven't playing left tackle. Anyways, though, so Jonah Williams is the only first round pick. Now, what needs to happen kind of moving forward is that they need to invest heavily in the offensive line. I know Bill Polian was on the Adam Schefter podcast and talked about how he hopes Joe Burrow is not the next Andrew Luck. I don't think Joe Burrow, hopefully, is the next Andrew Luck, but let me say this for the record. Ultimately, when you look at this, you need to build around the trenches. The 2019 Super Bowl, the Chiefs really showed why the quarterback position was important. Well, the 2021 Super Bowl really showcased why the offensive line is still important. It goes back to this fundamental fact of if you can't build your football team from inside out, you're really screwed over. I mean, we've seen a good offensive line and a really well coached offensive line make all the difference in the world. This Rams team that we saw in 2021, it was a really good offensive line. And guess what? Matt Stafford thrived. The 49ers are another team I look at. They have a really good offensive line. Guys like Trent Williams, Mike McGlinchey, Daniel Brunskill. And guess what? Jimmy G, who's an above average quarterback, or I should say average quarterback at best. But obviously, a lot of people in the Chicagoland area are Jimmy G fanboys because there's a direct correlation, Max, between being from the Chicagoland area and also being really good at football. Not really sure how that works, by the way. But anyways, that's just this Bears fan base loves to throw things at the wall and hype everything up. But the point I'm making is that a really good offensive line can really help a average or above average quarterback. And so the Bears need to understand that it's all about investing in the trenches. Now, luckily, as I've repeated multiple times on this show, as well as my other podcast with Bear Report, Ryan Poles comes from the Chiefs, who have drafted, I want to say, 12 or 13 offensive linemen over the last decade. And Ian Cunningham's background is with the Ravens and the Eagles, teams that have also drafted offensive linemen on day one, as well as days 2 and 3 of the NFL draft, which really bodes well moving forward. And then Matt Eberflus is a head coach that comes from the Colts as well as the Cowboys, a lot of where his NFL development took place. Two teams that also really love investing in the trenches. So if you look and see here, you're beginning to connect the dots, and these are observations that are only made on Fireside Bears, which is why you should be, following us on every single social media platform. The Bears are going to make investing in the trenches the number one priority. Okay. If you can't invest in the trenches, you're basically doing your quarterback a disservice. Drafting all these offensive linemen is great, but you better be able to develop them too.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Like the concept of just adding a bunch of talent because you're not sure whether or not it's going to be good or not isn't a winning strategy. And it's clear that that's what the Bengals have done over the past decade or so. Like you mentioned, they're among the league leaders in offensive linemen drafted over the past decade. So it's not like they're not looking at bringing in talent at the offensive line, right? It's just they're not bringing in the right talent, or they're waiting too long in the draft to make make those decisions. Like Hakeem Adeniji, right? He had a ridiculously bad game. He was probably the reason why the Bengals lost in very, very, very crucial situations, absolutely blown up by Aaron Donald, right? You're always going to get blown up by Aaron Donald, but the better offensive lineman at least push him in the other direction, or at least put up a little bit more of a second more of a fight, right? He was drafted in the 6th round and he's still playing and he's starting in the Super Bowl, right? So, I mean, there are obviously guys in the 6th and 7th round that may deserve to be starters, but if you're going to consistently draft offensive linemen at the later half of your draft, don't expect them to be the best of the best, right? You may get 1 out of 15 in that scenario. Like, I'm not willing to take those odds. Go in the mid rounds, go in the 3s, or go in the 2s if you really have an issue with it, right? That's why I'm saying I would not be stunned if the Bears didn't draft a wide receiver or linebacker at the 39th or 37th pick and decided to go with an offensive lineman. I would not be stunned at all whatsoever, especially after what we just saw. And the free agent market for guards is going to be absolutely massive because every single team watched what happened and is going to go, holy cow, is that what's going to happen to me, right? If I get into the Super Bowl, if I get my quarterback in a position to succeed, is my offensive line going to crumble around him? And am I going to watch the Lombardi slip from my hands, right? It's absolutely a trend that's going to be focused on in the league. And guess what? We just got our guy that's already in the forefront of it, right? With Ian Cunningham and Ryan Poles. So 100%. I mean, It's really about investing in top tier players. It's not just throwing out, onto the wall and seeing what sticks, which we as Bears fans love to do, as you just said. But it's really being selective. And that's a word that we've heard Ryan Poles use, selective, right? That's an incredibly powerful term for an organization to use. Because if we're going to be selective with the talent we allow into the Bears organization, we're going to make sure that we're bringing in the best of the best to protect our quarterback, right? Which is what teams like the Cowboys or the Eagles have done in the past. Even the Colts, right? Colts have some of the best guards, especially probably the best guard in Quentin Nelson in the entire NFL, right? And when was he taken? Oh, incredibly early in the draft in the first round, right? So I mean, when you're confident that you want to make your offensive line better, you're going to go out and you're going to get the best guys possible, but you're going to be selective of who those people are. So Bears clearly learned their lesson, especially after our season, which it should have been painful. It was like watching Justin Fields getting sacked out there that much. Incredibly painful if you're a Bengals fan because you just saw that all year, right? So long story short, Bears are going to be focusing on what the Bengals did wrong, but so is the rest of the league. But fortunately for us, we have an offensive lineman as a GM, and he's going to make sure those hog mollies are ripped and ready to go.
Speaking of hog mollies, shout out to Quentin Nelson, who is such a savage because he's making Giants fans and Dave Gettleman just continue to be completely miserable and pay for the big mistake that Dave Gettleman made. Because remember, that number 2 overall pick, guys, is worth hot dogs and peanuts, aka the snacks that you find at baseball games. Which, yeah, I want baseball to come back because those hot dogs at Wrigley Field in the middle of July, super, super, super underrated. But staying on track here, listen, look, let's talk draft picks, because when you look at the Rams, I mean, they pretty much gave up 2 first-round picks for Matthew Stafford and for Jalen Ramsey. They gave up more draft capital for Von Miller because they felt as if Von Miller was not in the Broncos' future plans. And they were like, oh, we're already out here trying to go ahead and build a roster, build a Super Bowl winning team. Let's go ahead and let's bring in Von Miller, add it to a defense that's already included guys like Ashawn Robinson, guys that are going to basically come and have a big impact. Former Bears legend Leonard Floyd, by the way, who I thought that Sunday night really showcased why Bears fans should not have criticized Leonard Floyd as much as they did. But anyways, because one of Leonard Floyd's first sacks is the reason that the Bengals offensive line cracked anyway. Now look, the Rams have basically told us and shown us, okay, we're gonna get it done with these mid-round picks. We may not have first rounders, but in a sense, that's okay, because what we are gonna do is develop these mid-round picks, develop these undrafted free agents, continue to bring in these veterans that are no longer part of another team's future plans, coach them up, and basically build a Super Bowl winning team. That's also a formula the Bears need to look at. Now, I'm not saying Ryan Poles is going to go ahead and trade every first round pick to immediately get the Bears back to contention. But what I am saying is this, is that it's an incredibly smart gamble by Les Snead and Sean McVay. Incredibly smart to basically go ahead and say, okay, cool, we don't have the first round picks, but we're going to offset that by continuing to develop all this talent. That's really noteworthy right there, because the Bears too are going to be in the same boat over the next couple seasons. I mean, I know Chicago doesn't have a 2023 6th-round pick because of the Jakeem Grant trade. I know that the Bears only have 5 draft picks in 2022. Certainly the possibility to acquire more is there, but the Bears' most valuable pick right now is the 39th overall pick, which they're going to have to trade down from. And really the 39th overall pick, when you look at the early returns for someone who's been covering the draft for so long, you're looking at basically moving down 10 to 11 spots and getting an extra 3rd or 4th rounder in the process, while swapping that 2nd-round pick with another team. But that point being is that ultimately for Chicago, they are going to have to draft and develop a lot of their day 2 and day 3 talent. A lot of those guys are going to be on these 4-year contracts. There's not going to be a 5th-year option, because the Bears are not going to have a first-round pick. But knowing the infusion of talent that this team needs on the defensive side of the ball, that day 2, day 3 talent is going to be where the Bears are going to need to figure out and target a lot of difference makers. One name that I consistently cite as being Well, I should say really two names, by the way, that I cite as being really good day two picks for both day two and day three picks for the Rams and Bengals. Number one would be safety Jordan Fuller from Ohio State. I think he was a fourth or fifth round pick of the Rams. Yeah, he's blossomed into a damn good safety for them. Same with Taylor Rapp, okay, of the Rams. Another really good safety slash hybrid linebacker in Raheem Morris's scheme. And then the other guy is OSU defensive end, well, former Ohio State defensive end, current Cincinnati Bengals defensive end, Sam Hubbard, who I believe was a 2018 or 19 third or second or third round pick. I forgot the year off the top of my head, but yeah, Sam Hubbard's developed into a phenomenal player for them for Cincinnati. That bears watching too because it shows that when you get your hands on a good prospect that has potential, guess what? The sky is the limit. I know that sounds generic, but the reason I highlighted Sam Hubbard specifically, as well as Jordan Fuller and Taylor Rapp, is because all those are players that I wanted the Bears to draft. And if you notice, there's a trend over the last couple of years, okay, is that every single year I watch probably one or two games of film on a lot of these players. And then what happens is this is I identify and say, oh, that's someone the Bears fan base isn't talking about. That's someone the Bears fan base isn't talking about. That's a player that's going to fit into the Bears scheme. That's a player the Bears need to go ahead and grab. And then the Bears never grab that player. And then lo and behold, those players end up going on to be really solid, productive starters anywhere else. I mean, another example of it would be Josie Jewell, who I think was in the 2018 or 2019 draft, who I thought was going to be a phenomenal fit in Vic Fangio, as well as Sean Desai and Chuck Pagano's scheme. But then Vic Fangio helped Josie Jewell become a really good inside linebacker. So, anyways, the point in case being is there's two things to learn. Number one, you should be listening to me when it comes to these draft picks and these guys, because I clearly have a knack for being like our guy Ryan Pace and identifying talent. And then, which side note, by the way, I hope Ryan Pace got really nice hair, by the way. Okay. And someone complimented my hair today before I got a haircut. But, anyways, the point is that, yeah, listen to me when it comes to these draft prospects. Also, continue to draft and develop those day two and day three guys. Do not just blow them off because the Rams showed that you don't have to have a bunch of first rounders. You can have the star power, but if it's offset by really good development, you can still build a solid roster. And the Rams are going to be competitive as a result of those day two and day three picks over the next couple of years and really good coaching. The Bears have always been a team over the last decade or so that's been able to find some decent talent on day two and three. But unfortunately, the problem with the Bears is they don't know how to develop that talent.
Yeah, 100%. It's one thing to make the most of what you're given, which is primarily what the Rams are betting on, right? You outlined it perfectly well. The Rams don't have a first round pick until 2024. That might be pound to change. They might move some pieces, who knows? But they're also really hedging on comp picks this draft. Of course, they'll get a third round comp pick by losing Brad Holmes. They're probably going to get one in the fourth, but they also don't have another fourth round pick until 2024. So the Rams won't be able to build through the draft really outside of some comp picks, which again, you lose pieces to get pieces. So no, this strategy for the Rams moving forward will be exactly what you said. And it's totally doable. It can be done. We've seen it done. You know, I don't understand the hype around making sure that you're like, you know, your first round pick is 100% it's going to be the best player from your draft every year. Like, no, we know that that's completely false. Like anyone pushing that narrative needs to just stop because it's not true. Specifically from the Bears, some of the best players from our previous draft class have been in those third and fourth rounds. And that's a trend that's probably going to continue at least in the near future, obviously, because we don't have a first, but Bears are definitely in a position to start building through the draft over the next couple of years, but primarily for the immediate, which is what we're primarily concerned about, they're going to have to hit some good home runs with the picks that we have. And I completely agree. It only makes sense to trade down. But as our previous video talked about, there's a lot of opportunity for the Bears to grow through the free agency this year, much like the Bengals did last offseason. And then, of course, there's a ton of talent at the offensive line position in this draft, which is something that I think people are starting to finally notice and talk about. And that really bodes well for day two picks for the Chicago Bears to specifically bolster some of the areas at guard, or maybe potential battle at the tackle position. But of course, we'll make sure to put out content so that you guys know who to look for in the draft. We do the work so you don't have to.
Yeah, we do all the work here, so you guys certainly don't have to. That's also part of becoming your one-stop shop for everything Chicago Bears news, guys. So thank you for all the support. Last comment I'm going to make here, you touched on earlier about the Bears and being able to really value what's out there in free agency. Ryan Poles has said he's going to connect evaluation to valuation. Ryan Poles has said he's going to be more active on day 2 and 3. I'm sorry, not day and 2, but the second and third waves of free agency. Well, technically day 2 and 3 of free agency are the second and third waves already, because free agency doesn't even start and the news already starts flying and coming out about who's signing with who. But look, the reason I bring the second and third wave of free agency up in connection to key positions such as wide receiver, as well as offensive tackle and offensive guard and cornerback and safety, is because if you're a team like the Bears that has those significant needs, you need to understand that those classes this year are relatively deep at all those positions. And there's enough talent there to where you're not going to have to overspend on day one or in the initial waves of free agency to get players. You are always going to have teams that are going to try and reel in the big fishes and overpay to do so, which is, by the way, a very Ryan Pace thing to do. Ryan Poles has said, yeah, cool. I understand Brandon Sheriff might be out there and be a free agent for the Washington football team, because Washington Commanders is an absolutely garbage of a name. I don't know why they came up with something so terrible. But the point is I'm making is that Ryan Poles is going to take a step back and say, yeah, Brandon Sheriff's cool and all. Be great to have a blue chip offensive lineman like him on my offensive line protecting Justin Fields. The thought certainly sounds great, but if he's going to command way too much money, guess what? I'm not going to do it. I would rather settle for not necessarily someone who's a lesser talent, but just someone who makes more sense for the Bears in the short term as well as in the long term. Because signing a free agent is not just about addressing a need. Signing a free agent is about addressing a need, but then also figuring out, hey, how can this acquisition give me some flexibility in the short term so I can make it work, but also give me flexibility in the long term to the point where if I need to move on from him, guess what? I can totally end up doing so and not necessarily have to commit to money in the future for a player that's not even on the roster. So unfortunately, Chicago is going to have to do that this year. You have a couple names like a Nick Foles and Danny Trevathan that I don't expect to be back in 2022, but the Bears are going to be stuck paying those guys.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be a good amount of roster turnover. And whenever we bring in free agents, the whole concept is ideally we'd like to build through the draft. I think that's something that Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus share, at least with me and us at Fireside Bears, is free agents are great for their services, but ideally we'd like to have homegrown talent because one, it's going to be cheaper for you in the short end. And two, you can, we're just looking at a pure business standpoint. But sometimes free agents can come in and really help turn around your organization. And whoever that is for the Chicago Bears this offseason is whoever it is. But I wouldn't be stunned if, again, we don't see big name signings, but some of the lesser signing guys just because of the cap situation that we're in. But I still wouldn't leave it out to doubt that we might be competitive for 1 to 2 major players. But ideally, this regime looks towards the draft. To building the future around this young core is keep this young, bring in some good veterans in the free agency, allow them to kind of foster the youth and grow a winning success from the ground up. And that really does start with the draft.
Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. We're going to get out of here because I am incredibly hungry. And I know that the last time I ate dinner while recording YouTube, people were in my DMs talking about how these podcasts and recordings don't take forever, so no taco dinners for you. But yeah, guys, make sure you're following us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Fireside Bears. Make sure you're following myself and Max on Twitter at Usayd Koshal and at Max Smith ESM. Keep it locked in right here, guys. I've got agents blowing up my phone and stuff, so we are going to go ahead and start having on bigger name prospects from D1 schools. So yeah, we got an interview scheduled for Thursday. Might be a second interview on Thursday too, guys. I just have to work through the details of a couple things. Make sure that you are keeping it locked into our weekly show. So a lot of really good content going on right now. And who knows? I don't know. Maybe next week we will do a video on what the Bears need to do with guys like Allen Robinson and whether or not there's actually any tradable talent that's currently on the Bears roster. Because I know Saturday, I understand it's slow, guys, but I know on Saturday, the day before the Super Bowl, we were talking about trading Khalil Mack, Robert Quinn, and Eddie Jackson. So, we'll break it down, guys. We'll certainly do something. And yeah, but other than that, ladies and gentlemen, stay safe, stay warm, and bear down until next time, guys. Bear down.